So you guys know how in my last video I said that Sandrone is kind of mid right now, but that's okay because she's missing a ton of things like her supportive set, her dedicated support, and so on. But version 2 happened, and now Sandrone even right now, you could probably put her in top 3 discussions for the best DPS. And her teammate diversity is so good and accessible, and there's no way she survived this beta, right? Hello there, Flip here, and today we're going to be discussing Sandrone's buffs, Yai's buffs as well, actually, because they fixed what I complained about in my last video where her stellar conduct hits were so low. I'm saving Risley and Sino for another video, we can discuss that later. And we're just going to be going over what all the Sandrone changes mean and how they impact her place in the meta. But before we do that, as always, if at any point during the video you are entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as I talk on various topics regarding Genshin's meta, and I'll try to keep you updated. Shout out to my lovely channel members, I really appreciate your support, it means the world to me. I hope you guys can receive buffs on the levels of Sandrone to your base health. That was bad, I'm sorry. And no sponsor for this video, so let's just get right into it. I guess we'll start by discussing what changed with Sandrone. Her charge attack received a 34% multiplier increase, and this is of course her main source of damage, which is huge. And then on top of this, they also giga buffed her burst in 2 ways. For starters, it received a 25% increase to its multipliers, and then on top of this, they buffed Sandrone's passive, which buffs this burst, going from a 1.5 times multiplier to a 2x multiplier. So especially for a DPS burst, Sandrone just has one of the strongest in the game. And then to add to this, another finding we didn't have when I posted my video is the fact that Sandrone can swap out of her burst extremely early on in the animation and still get the full damage. So the burst both has a very quick animation on top of being a tactical nuke. And there are some other cancels Sandrone can do, mainly the fact that her burst cancels her skill perfectly, so you still get the full skill damage while also bursting insanely fast. And also the fact that the E can be dash cancelled as well, to start your charge attacks up quicker. So Sandrone's field time in general is a lot shorter than what I assumed initially, which combined with her damage buffs, makes Sandrone overall a very powerful DPS, which I'll showcase in a bit. Now next up on the block, let's talk about Yai. In version 1, when looking at gameplay, she was getting a lot less stellar conduct hits than what the details of her passive were saying, which did cause her damage to be technically undercalculated. But now in version 2, they gave her a stealth buff, where none of her text was changed or anything, they just doubled the amount of stellar hits she gets, so it's actually accurate to her text description. So if my Yai damage looks a bit high compared to other people's, this was a discovery found a little bit after we got the version 2 changes, and I'm thankfully late so I'm able to update this. And I don't think there are any other changes, so let's start discussing them numbers. So as you should know if you watched my last video, the current best Sandrone team is going to be composed of Escoffier, Yai, and Nicole. And of course Escoffier can be replaced by other characters, such as Diona and Chi-Chi for very similar results. So with her premium team, Sandrone is currently sitting at 120k on the lower end with Diona, up to 130k DPS with their best team. This is just directly competing with Skirk, which again, may I remind you, Sandrone doesn't have her craftable, she doesn't have a supportive artifact set, this is before the Cryo Archon, who's definitely going to be a boost to her teams, and you can argue that she doesn't have a dedicated support, but to defend the rest of the Genshin cast, C1 Yai is kind of as good as a dedicated support, with both her amazing damage and buffing. But again, even if you don't change the teammates, basic things like a supportive set and a craftable, depending on how good they are, can be upwards of a 5k DPS increase. Inefa was last year's release, and I think she was only really hovering around the low 100k DPS range with some of the better DPSs at the time, and Sandrone is just starting at a 30% higher baseline, with very accessible characters besides Yai, I guess. So yes, I can't state this enough, Sandrone is shaping up to be a powerhouse. And speaking of her accessibility, I wasn't joking, you can make a full 4-star composition with Sandrone, and it still ends up being around 100k DPS. And this is with all of these characters not even being things you have to pull for. So if you are someone who has skipped a lot of characters and were saving pulls for Sandrone, if you can just get Sandrone and her signature weapon, it would be about as good as getting no Sandrone signature weapon and having her premium supports. So you really shouldn't feel pressure to pull for any support for Sandrone, specifically Nicole and Yai. Nicole isn't even really fully synergistic in Sandrone teams, and despite the fact that yes, Yai is really good, Hoyoverse is very unpredictable and can just do anything, and there is a chance that that Yai gets replaced in the future, so honestly getting Sandrone's signature weapon seems like better future-proofing to me. Now let's talk about team variations. I already showed how Escoffier can be easily replaced with Diona or Gigi, but if we want to talk about Nicole replacements, Beidou is quite good and she just holds noblesse. Running Shallonen on instructors, as you can see, is also a very competitive option to Nicole, and I haven't calculated it yet, but doubling up with Chi-Chi and Diona with Yai, as well as running Sucre should also be fine options. Sucre just won't be as good here as she is in like an Electro Charge team, as you won't be able to consistently double swirl both Electro and Cryo, on top of her Res Shred not even lasting as long anyways, so either Yai or Sandrone will have their damage gimped, which sucks, and is why Shallonen's much easier double shredding setups are more favorable here. So if you don't have Nicole, you have very accessible options in Beidou and Sucrose, as well as just using both Cryo Sustains on the team, but if you have Shallonen, you should obviously use her. Now if you happen to not have a Yai, this is where things get very interesting actually. For one, Beidou can just be a Yai replacement directly, and the same things I said prior are going to apply, where Nicole doesn't have to be in the slot, you can double up with the Cryo Sustains. That makes the 2-cost team, you can use Shallonen, you can use Sucrose, and they're all good. So don't feel pressured to get Nicole, please. Well... Speaking of Nicole, there is actually a setup you can run with her that's quite good. Nicole isn't really taking advantage of her Hexrai buffs in this team, due to the fact that bursting with her is going to be a DPS loss, and she's just here for her attack buff. But if you don't have Yai, you can technically just use Fischl. And if you're able to cause an overload every rotation, which involves having to use Nicole's bursts to apply enough pyro, then Fischl will activate her Hexrai buff for the extra attack. And even though it only buffs Sandrone for like half of her field time, as you can see, the results really aren't that bad, even with all of the caveats. And speaking of combining different game mechanics, we can make a stellar lunar team. Yes, the Sandbina team is real, and it again is surprisingly decent. You are going to need the Divine Wheelchair Core, alongside most likely Shallonen as the best in slot, as she gets the easiest access to triple res shredding, which again Sucrose doesn't really, so Sucrose is probably going to be a bit worse here. And also this team just really isn't that synergistic, but the units are so strong it doesn't really matter. Sandrone's Cryo application messes with the lunar charged auras, so you're going to be missing a couple of procs from it, while at the same time when Sandrone leaves the field and there's no more Cryo application, this causes you to no longer generate stacks for your stellar field. So whenever Sandrone re-enters the field, she's going to be starting with a much weaker charge attack. So again, this team is anti-synergistic and the reactions are fighting each other, but Sandrone, Columbina, and Neff are so strong it doesn't matter, so the team still ends up being good, which is kind of lore accurate. And of course, compared to all the other teams I've showed, this one has some of the lowest damage from Sandrone in terms of her personal damage, so it isn't going to scale the best with her investment. So if you were using something like this because you have no other options, if you are getting things like Sandrone's signature weapon or her constellations, or you're just going to grind to get a really strong Sandrone, I would recommend just going back to the 1-cost team, as that scales better with Sandrone stuff. And the only other teams I have calculated are going to be the Risley and Sino teams, but once again, we're saving that for another video. So let's just wrap this video up by discussing my thoughts with Sandrone. She is one of my favorite characters, so I am very happy that she's strong, but this is very concerning. May I remind you, Nefa's best teams on release were only around 100k DPS. Flynn's and Nefer pre-Columbina, who had their craftable weapons and their supportive sets, were in the 110k to 120k DPS range, and those are some of Sandrone's weaker teams, on top of them having a lot less flexibility than her, and less team archetypes they could be played in, that at least were on par with their better teams. Sandrone right now just has so many flex slots that are free to obtain, as well as someone like Yai who has a free C1. And once again, may I remind you, Sandrone is putting up these numbers without her supportive artifact set or a decent craftable weapon. It's very likely that the moment we hit 7.0, Sandrone just gets a free 10k DPS increase from KQMS standards, which would put her teams above both Malvika and Skirk and just right behind the lunar carries. All of this before the Cryo Archon, and she's shaping up to be one of the most brain-dead characters to play too, with the depth of someone like Nouvellette. I was already pretty certain by the time that she received all of her thingies that she would be the best DPS in the game, but her changes now have just confirmed it, and it's probably going to be happening a lot sooner than I thought it would be. And I can't remember the last time we had a carry that was this good, with this much accessibility in her teammates, that was this easy to play. I think it might arguably have been Nouvellette. And I can't decide whether or not this is a good or bad thing, because I'm happy we're getting a carry like this that almost everyone can pick up and use. But But for following the trend of what's been happening with Skirk till the recent Nordcry carries, I just don't want them to use Sandrone as an excuse to lead to more HP inflation on top of more shield mechanics just because Sandrone is so strong. And I hope, like with Varka, that she just sits around the level of the lunar carries and doesn't really go that much further above them. But it's Hoyoverse. So I think we know which way they're going to go with Sandrone. But anyways, I have yapped enough. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on Sandrone right now, as I'd love to hear it and I respond to almost every single comment. Channel members, thank you so much for supporting the channel. It means the world to me. Hope you all have an amazing day. Thank you to everyone else for watching the video, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.